Hello, my dears. Now, if you remember, I was unable to record a nice reading hour due to the, I suppose you could say, inclement weather. But, as I promised, I will record an hour just for everyone to enjoy up on my YouTube channel. But before we begin, I shall light some incense for the mood. And with the lighting of the incense, now begins our time of relaxation and wonder. Our first story for today is called The Misfortunes of Barrett the Piper, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. Barrett the Piper, you see, lost his skills and was advised to go to the Black North to recover it. Barrett was a Munster man. Well, he took his little boy with him, and they walked till the dark came. And they went into a cabin by the roadside to look for lodging. God save all here, says they. Save you kindly, says the man to the house. But he left out the holy name. How are you, Jack Barrett? Musha, pure and hearty, sir. Many thanks for the asking. But how did you know of me? Ah, I knew you before you were weaned. Well, faith, they got a good supper of peaties and milk, and a good bed of straw was made for them up by the wall up near the fire. And they lay down quite comfortable to get a good sleep. But some bad thoughts came over Jack Barrett in the dead of the night, and he got up and went out of the bed, and it's in the fields he found himself, and a couple of mad dogs running after him. There was a big tree near him with ever so many crow's nests on the top, and he ran and climbed up in it from the dogs, and if he missed the dogs he found the crows, and they didn't fall on him to tear his eyes out. He bawled and he roared, and the man of the house came into the kitchen and stirred the fire, and there was Jack Barrett on the hen roost, and the cocks and hens cackling about him. Musha, the sorrow's on you for a Jack Barrett. How did you get up there amongst the fowl? The goodness knows it was not their company I want. Will you help me down, honest man? Well, he got into bed again, and if he did, he was not there long, when a bad thought came into his head, and he got up. He was going into the next room, to where he did find himself, but by the bank of a big river, and the same two dogs tearing along like vengeance to the gibbets of him. There was a tree there, and its boughs were out over the river. Up climbs Jack, and up after him with the dogs, and to get out of their clutches he scrambled out on and further. The dogs were soon feeling after him, and he going out farther and farther, till he was afraid it would break. At last he felt it cracking, and he gave a roar out of him that you would hear a mile off. And the man of the house came into the kitchen and stirred the fire, and there was Drac straddling the pot rack. "Musha, Jack, but you're the devil's square youth at your time of life to be making a horse of my pot rack. Come down, you Oshak, and go to bed." Well, the third time, where did the devil guide him but to a bed in the next room? And when he flopped into it, he let such a yowl out of him that you'd think it was heaven and earth coming together. "What's in the wind now, Jack?" says the man of the house. "Oh, it's in the pains of labor I am," says the unfortunate piper. "Will we send the midwife for you?" says the other. "Oh, the curse of Cromwell on yourself and the midwife," says the poor man. "It wasn't God had a hand in us the hour we darkened your door. Oh, tatharation to you, you old thief. Won't you give us some ale?" "Father, honey," says the boy, "it's pish roses. Pish rogues is an you. A drop of holy water will do you more good nor the master of the house, God bless him." "If you say that again." "Well, anyhow," says the boy, "let's make the sign of the cross on yourself, father, and say the Lord's Prayer." The poor hood piper did so, and at the blessed words and the signs his pains left him. There was no sight of the man of the house on the spot then. Maybe he was in the lower room. When the piper and his son woke the next morning, they were lying in the dry moat of an old raft that lay by the high road. A little bit trippy, one might say. Our next story is The Pudding Bewitched, attributed to William Carleton. Mulroe Rafferty was the son, daughter of mine, that could Jack Rafferty, who was remarkable for the habit he had of always wearing his head under his hat. But indeed the same family was a queer one, and everybody knew that was acquainted with them. It was said of them, but whether it was true or not, I wouldn't undertake to say, for afraid I would tell a lie. But that whenever they didn't wear shoes or boots, they always went barefoot. But I heard afterwards that it was disputed, so rather than say anything to injure their character, I let it pass. Now, could Jack Rafferty had 2 sons, Patty and Molly. Oh, what are you all laughing at? I mean a son and a daughter, and it was generally believed among the neighbors that they were brother and sister, which you know might be true or it might not. But that's the thing with the help of goodness. we have nothing to say to. Mm, True, there were many ugly things put out on them that I don't wish to repeat, such as that neither Jack nor his son Paddy ever walked a perch without putting one foot afore the other like a salmon. And I know that it was whispered about that whenever Moll Rose slept, she had an out of the way custom of keeping her eyes shut. If she did, however, for the matter of loss was her own, for sure we all know that when one comes to shut their eyes, they can't be seen as far as they can't be seen as far before them as another. Mulroe was a fine young bouncing girl, large and lavish, with a pretty head of hair on her like scarlet, that being one of the reasons why she was called Roe or Red. Her arms and cheeks were much of the color of her hair, and her saddle nose was the prettiest thing of its kind that ever was on a face. Her fists, for thank goodness she was well served with them too, had a strong similarity to two thumping turnips, reddened by the sun, and to keep all right and tight, she had a temper as fiery as her hair. For indeed it was well known that all the Raffertys were warm-hearted. However, it appears that God gives nothing in vain, and of course the same fists, big and red as they were, if all that is said about them is true, there were not much so given to her for ornament as use. At last, taking them in connection with her lively temper, we have it upon good authority that there was no danger of their getting blue molded for want of practice. She had a twist, too, in one of her eyes that was very becoming in its way, and made her poor husband, when she got him, take it into his head that she could see round the corner. She found him out in many queer things without a doubt, but whether it was owing to that or not, I wouldn't undertake to say, for afraid I'd tell a lie. Well, begad, anyhow it was Moll Roe that was the Dilsey or love. It happened that there was a night vagabond in the neighborhood, just as much overburdened with beauty as herself, and he was named Betsy Gilsby. Betsy, the Lord guard us, was what they'd call a black-mouth Presbyterian, and wouldn't keep Christmas Day, the blackguard, except what they would call old style. Betsy was rather good looking when seen in the dark, as well as Molly herself, and indeed it was pretty well known that, according as the talk went, it was in nightly meetings that they had the opportunity of becoming detached to one another. The consequence was that in due time both families began to talk very seriously as to what was to be done, Mole's brother, Podden O'Rafferty, gave Gutsy the best of two choices. What they were, it is not worth speaking about. But at any rate, one of them was a poser, and as Gutsy knew his man, he soon came to his senses. Accordingly, everything was arranged for their marriage, and it was appointed that they should be spliced by the Rev. Samuel M. Shuttle, the Presbyterian parson, on the following Sunday. Now, this is the first marriage that had happened in a long time in the neighborhood between a blackmouth and a Catholic, and of course there was strong objections on both sides against it. And begad only for one thing. It would never took place at all. At any rate, Fakes, there was one of the bride's uncles, old Harry Connolly, a ferryman, who could cure all complaints with the secrets he had. And as he didn't wish to see his niece married to such a fellow, he fought bitterly against the match. All Mole's friends, however, stood up for the marriage, barring him, and of course the Sunday was appointed, as I said, that they were to be dovetailed together. Well, the day arrived, and Mole, as become of her, went to Mass, and Gutsy to a meeting, after which they were joined together, one another, in Jack Rafferty's, where the priest, Father Sorley, was to slip up after the Mass to take his dinner with them, and to keep Mr. Shuttle, who was to marry him, company. Nobody remained at home but old Jack Rafferty and his wife, who stopped to dress the dinner. For, to tell the truth, it was to be a great let-out entirely. Maybe, if all was known too, that Father Sorley was to give them a cast of his office over and above the Minster, in regards that Mole's friends were not altogether satisfied at the kind of marriage which Shuttle could give them. The sorrow may care about that. Splice here, splice there. And all I can say is that when Miss Rafferty was going up to tie up the big bag of pudding, in walks Harry Connolly, the ferryman, in a rage, and shouts out, "Blood and blunderbrushes, what are you here for?" Why, Harry? Why, avec? Why, the sun's in the suds, and the moon is high oryx. There's a clipstick coming, and there you're both as unconcerned as if it was about to rain mether. Go out and cross yourselves 3 times in the name of the 4 Mandro Marvins, for as prophecy says, fill the pot, Eddie, supernaculum, A blazing star's a rare specialty. Go out, both of you, and look at the sun, I say, and you'll see the condition he's in off. I do apologize, for this is one of the stories that is written in a very highly accented way. If I were to read the story as it were typed out, it would be, begad, sure enough, Jack gave a bounce to the door, and his wife leapt like a 2-year-old, till they were both got on a side beside the house to see what was wrong with the sky. "Arrah, what is it, Jack?" says she. "Can you see anything?" "No," says he. "Sorra the fool o' me eye of anything I can spy, barrin' the sun himself, that's not visible in regards of the clouds. God guard us, I doubt there's something to happen." "If there wasn't, Jack, what 'ud put Harry, that knows so much, in the state he's in?" "I doubt it's this marriage," says Jack. Between ourselves, it's not over and above religious for a mole to marry a black mouth, and only for. But it can't be helped now. Though you see not a taste o' the sun is willin' to show his face upon it. "As to that," says the wife, winking wid both her eyes, "if Gutsy's satisfied wid Mole, that's enough. I know who'll carry the whip hand anyhow. But in the meantime, let us ax Harry anything that ails the sun." Well, they accordingly went in and put the question to him. "Harry, what's wrong, Agur? What is it now? For if anybody alive knows, 'tis yourself." "Ah," said Harry, screwing with his mouth with a kind of a dry smile, "the sun has a hard twist of the colic, but never mind that. I tell you, you'll have a merrier wedding than you think, that's all." And having said this, he put on his hat and left the house. Now, Harry's answer relieved them very much, and so, after calling to him to be back for the dinner, Jack sat down to take a shog of the pipe, and the wife lost no time in tying up the pudding and putting it in the pot to be boiled. In the way things went on well enough for a while, Jack smoking away and his wife cooking and dressing at the rate of the hunt. At last Jack, while sitting, as I said, contentedly at the fire, thought he could perceive an odd dancing kind of motion in the pot that puzzled him a great deal. "Caddy," says he, "what the dickens is in the pot on the fire?" "Not a thing but the big pudding." "Why do you ax?" says she. "Why," says he, "if ever a pot took it into its head to dance a jig, and this did, thunder and sparbles, look at it." Begad, it was true enough. There was a pot bubbling up and down, and from side to side, jiggling it away as merry as a grig, and it was quite easy to see that it wasn't the pot itself. But what was inside of it that brought it about the hornpipe? "Be the whole of my coat," shouted Jack. "There's something alive in it, or it would never cut such capers." "Begorra, there is, Jack. Something strange entirely has got into it. We're a man alive. What's to be done?" Just as she spoke, the pot seemed to cut the buckle in a prime style, and after a spring that would shame a dancing master, off flew the lid, and out bounced the pudding itself, hopping as nimble as a pea on the drumhead about the floor. Jack blessed himself, and Catty crossed herself. Jack shouted, and Catty screamed. "In the name of goodness, keep your distance. No one here injure you." The pudding, however, made a set at him, and Jack leapt first on the chair, and then on the kitchen table to avoid it. Then it danced towards Kitty, who was now repeating her prayers at the top of her voice, while the cunning thief of the pudding was hopping and jiggling at it round her, as if it was amused at her distress. "If I could get the pitchfork," says Jack, "I'd deal with it. By Goxty, I'd try its metal." "No, no," shouted Catty, thinking there was a fairy in it. "Let us spike it fair. Who knows what harm it might do?" "Aisy now," said she to the pudding. "Aisy, dear. Don't harm honest people that never meant to offend you. It wasn't us. No, in troth. It was old Harry Connolly that bewitched you. Pursue him if you wish, but spare a woman like me. For, whisper dear, I'm not in a condition to be frightened. Troth, I'm not." The puddin', bedad, seemed to take her at her word, and danced away from her towards Jack, who, like his wife, believing there was a fairy in it, and that spiking it fair was the best plan, thought he would give it a soft word as well as her. "Place your honor," says Jack, "she only spikes the truth, and, upon my voracity, we both feels much obliged to your honor for your quietness. Faith, it's quite clear that if you weren't a gentlemanly pudding all out, you'd act otherwise. Old Harry, the rogue, is your mark. He'd just gone down the road there, and if you go fast, you'll overtake him. Be me song, your dancing master did his duty anyhow. Thank your honor. God speed you. And may you never meet with the parson or alderman in your travels." Just as Jack spoke, the pudding appeared to take the hint, for it quietly hopped out, and as the house was directly on the roadside, turned down towards the bridge, the very way that old Harry went. It was very natural, of course, that Jack and Catty should go out to see how they intended to travel, and as the day was Sunday, it was but natural, too, that a greater number of people than usual were passing the road. This was a fact, and when Jack and his wife were seen following the pudding, the whole neighborhood was soon up and after it. "Jack Rafferty, what is it?" Katy, our girl, will you tell us what it means? Why, replied Katy, it's my big pudding that's bewitched, and it's now hot foot pursuin'. She stopped here, not wishing to mention her brother's name. Someone or other that surely put pishrogues in it, or to put it under the fairy's influence. That was enough. Jack, now saying that he had assistance, found his courage coming back to him. So he says to Katy, "Go home," says he, "and waste no time in making another pudding all good. And here's Patty Schland's wife, Bridget. Says she'll let you boil it on her fire, as you'll want our own to dress the rest of the dinner, and Paddy himself will lend me a pitchfork. For pursuant to that morsel of the same pudding will escape till I let the wind out of it. Now that I've the neighbours to back and support me," says Jack. This was agreed to, and Katy went back to prepare fresh pudding, while Jack and half of the townsland pursued the other with spades, rakes, and pitchforks, scythes, flails, and all possible descriptions of instruments. On the pudding went, however, at the rate of about 6 Irish miles an hour, and such a chase was never seen. Catholics, Protestants, and Presbyterians were all after it, armed, as I said, and bad end to the thing, but its own activity could save it. Here it made a hop, and there was a prod made at it. But off it went, and someone, as eager to get a slice at it on the other side, got the prod instead of the pudding. Big Frank Farrell, the miller of Ballybolteen, got a prod backwards that brought a hullabaloo out of him you might hear at the end of the parish. One got a slice of the scythe, another a whack of the flail, the third a rap of the spade that made him look 9 ways at once. "Where is it going?" asked one. "My life for you. It's on its way to meeting. 3 cheers for it if it turns to Carton. Prod the soul out of it if it's a Protestant," shouted the others. "If it turns to the left, slice it into pancakes. We'll have no Protestant puddings here." Egad, by this time the people were on the point of beginning to have a regular fight about it, when, very fortunately, it took a short turn down a little by-lane that led towards the Methodist Ration House, and in all an instant all parties were in an uproar against it as a Methodist pudding. "It's a Wesleyan," shouted several voices, "and by this and that into a Methodist chapel it won't put a foot today, or we'll all lose a fall. Let the wind come out of it. Come, boys, where's your pitchforks?" The divil pursuing on to the one of them, however, ever could touch the pudding. And just when they thought they had it up against the gravel of the Methodist chapel, begad it gave them the slip and hops over the left, clang into the river, and sails away before all their eyes, as light as an eggshell. Now it so happened that a little below this place, the diminutive wall of Colonel Bradshaw was built up to the very edge of the river, on each side of its banks. And so finding there was a stop put to the pursuit of it, they went home again, every man, woman, and child of them, puzzled to think what the pudding was at all, what it meant, or where it was going. Had Jack Rafferty and his wife been willing to let out the opinion they held about Harry Connolly bewitching it, there is no doubt of it but poor Harry might have been treated badly by the crowd when their blood was up. They had sense enough, however, to keep that to themselves. For Harry, being an old bachelor, was a kind friend to the Raffertys. So, of course, there was all kinds of talk about it. Some guessing this, some guessing that. One party saying the pudding was on their side, another party denying it, and insisting it belonged to them, and so on. In the meantime, Caddy Rafferty, afraid the dinner might come short, went home and made another pudding much about the same size as the one that had escaped, and bringing it over to their next neighbor, Hattie Schlanz, it was to put into a pot and placed on the fire to boil, hoping that it might be done in time, especially as they were to have the minister, who loved a warm slice of good pudding, as well as a gentleman in Europe. Anyhow, the day passed. Mole and Gutsy were made man and wife, and no two could be more loving. Their friends that had been asked to the wedding were sauntering about in pleasant little groups till dinner time, chatting and laughing, but above all things, striving to account for the figures of the pudding. For, to tell the truth, its adventures had now gone through the whole parish. Well, at any rate, dinner time was drawing near, and Paddy Schlan was sitting comfortably with his wife at the fire, the pudding boiling before their eyes, when in walks in Harry Connolly, in a flutter, shouting, "Blood and bunder blushes! What are ye's here for?" "Arrah, why, Harry, why avec?" said Miss Schlan. "Why," said Harry, "the suns and the suds and the moons and the high horrocks. Here's a clapstick comin' in, and there you sit as unconcerned as if it was about to rain mether. Go out, both of you, and look at the sun, I say, and you'll see the condition he's in off." "Aye, but Harry, what's that roll up in the tail of your big coat?" "Out with ye's," said Harry, "and pray against the clapstick. The sky's falling." "Begad, It was hard to say whether Paddy or his wife got out first. They were so much alarmed by Harry's wild thin face and piercing eyes. So out they went to see what was wonderful in the sky, and kept looking and looking in every direction, but not a thing was to be seen, barring the sun shining down with great humor, and not a single night cloud in the sky. Patty and the wife now came in laughing to scold Harry, who, no doubt, was a great wag in his way when he wished. Musha, bad scran to you, Harry. They had time to say no more, however, for as they were going into the door, they met him coming out with a reek of smoke out of his tail like a lime kiln. "Harry," shouted Bridget, "my soul and to glory, but the tail of your cough hammer's on fire. You'll be burned. Don't you see the smoke that's out of it? Cross yourselves 3 times, said Harry without stopping, or even looking behind him. For, as the prophecy says, fill the pot, Eddie. They could hear no more, for Harry appeared to feel like a man that carried something a great deal hotter than he wished, as anyone might see by the liveliness in his motions, and the queer faces he was forced to make as he went along. "What the dickens is he carrying in that big coat of his?" asked Patty. "My soul to happiness, but maybe he has stole the pudding," says Bridget, "for it's known that many a thrange things he does." They immediately examined the pot, but found that the pudding was there as safe as tuppence, and this puzzled them even more, to think that it was he could be carrying with him in the manner that he did. But little they knew what he had done when they were sky gazing. Well, anyhow, the day passed and the dinner was ready, and no doubt but a fine gathering there was to partake of it. The Presbyterian minister met with the Methodist preacher. A devilish stretcher of an appetite he had in throth. On their way to Jack Rafferty's, and as he knew he could take the liberty, why he insisted on dining with him, for after all, begad, in them times the clergy of all descriptions lived upon the best footing among one another, not all as one as now, but no matter. Well, they had nearly finished the dinner, when Jack Rafferty himself asked Catty for the pudding, but just as he spoke, in it came as big as a mess pot. "Gentlemen," said he, "I hope none of you will refuse tasting a bit of Catty's pudding. I don't mind the dancing one that truck to its travels today, but a good, solid fellow that she made since." "To be sure we won't," replied the priest. So Jack put a trifle on them, 3 plates on at your right hand, and send them over here to the clergy, and maybe, he said laughing, for he was a droll, good-humored man, "maybe, Jack, we won't set you a proper example. With with the heart and a half, your reverence and gentlemen, in troth." It's not a bad example ever any of us at the likes or ever will set us. I'll go bail, and surely I only wish it were better far I had for you. But we're humble people, gentlemen, and so you can't expect to meet here what you would in higher places. Better a male of herbs, said the Methodist preacher, wear pieces. He had time to go no further, however, for much to his amazement, the priest and the minister started up from the table just as he was going to swallow the first spoonful of pudding, and before you could say Jack Robinson, started away at a lively jig down the floor. At this moment, a neighbor's son came running in and told them that the parson was coming to see the new married couple and wish them all the happiness. And the words were scarcely out of his mouth when he made his appearance. What to think he knew not, when he saw the minister footing it away at the rate of a wedding. He had very little time, however, to think for before he could sit down, up starts the Methodist preacher, and clapping his two fists in his side chimes in great style along with him. Jack Rafferty, says he, and by the way, Jack was his tenant. What the dickens does all this mean? He says. I'm amazed. Then not a particle of me can tell you, says Jack. But will your reverence just taste a morsel of pudding, merely that the young couple may boast that you ate at their wedding? For sure if you wouldn't, who would? Well, says he, to gratify them I will, so just a morsel. But Jack, this bates Banneker, says he again, putting a spoonful of pudding in his mouth. Was there been drink here? Oh, the devil a spud, says Jack, for although there's plenty in the house, faith, it appears the gentlemen wouldn't wait for it, unless they tuck it elsewhere. I can make nothing of this. He had scarcely spoken when the parson, who was an active man, cut a caper a yard high, and before you could bless yourself, the three clergy were hard at work dancing, as if for wager. Begad, it would be impossible for me to tell you the state of the whole meeting was in when they seen this. Some were hoarse with laughing, some turned up their eyes with wonder, many thought them mad, and others thought they had turned up their little fingers a trifle too often. Begoxty, it's a burning shame, says one, to see three black-mouthed clergy in sick estate at this early hour. Thundier and ounce, what's over them at all, says others. Why, one would think they're bewitched. Holy Moses, look at the caper the Methodist cuts. And as for the rector, reacher, who would think he could handle his feet at such a rate? Be this and that, he cuts the buckle, and does the treble and step quillily to Paddy Horrigan, the dancing master himself, and see, bad cess to the morsel of the parson that's not hard at peace upon trencher. And it was a Sunday, too. We're rude gentlemen, the fun's in yees after all. Wish more powder to yees. The Sora's own fun they had, and no wonder, but judge of what they felt when all at once they saw old Jack Rafferty himself bouncing in among them and footing it away like the best of them. Bedad, no play could come up to it, and nothing could be heard but laughing, shouts of encouragement, and clapping of hands like mad. Now, the minute Jack Rafferty left the chair where he had been carving the pudding, old Harry Connolly comes over and claps himself down in his place in order to send it round, of course, and he was scarcely sated when who should make his appearance but Barney Hartigan, the piper. Barney, by the way, had been sent for the early in the day, that being from home when the message went to him, he couldn't come any sooner. "Begorra," said Barney, "you're early at this work, gentlemen, but what does this mine? But divil may care, ye shan't want the music while there's a blast in the bagpipes anyhow." So saying, he gave them Jig Palthrobe, and after that Kiss My Lady, in his best style. In the meantime, the fun went on thick and threefold, for it must be remembered that Harry, the old knave, was at the pudding, and maybe he didn't starve it out in double quick time too. The first he helped was the bride, and before you could say chopstick, she was at it hard and fast before the Methodist preacher, who gave a jolly spring before her that threw them into convulsions. Harry liked this, and made up his mind soon to find partners for the rest. So he accordingly sent the pudding about like lightning, and, to make the long story short, barring the piper and himself, there wasn't a pair of heels in the house but was a busy dancing at the dancing as if their lives depended on it. "Barney," says Harry, "just taste a morsel of this pudding. Devil the such a bully of a pudding ever you ate. Here, your soul. Try a snig of it. It's beautiful." "To be sure I will," says Barney. "I'm not the boy to refuse a good thing. But Harry, be quick, for you know my hands is engaged, and it would be 1,000 pities not to keep them in music, and they so well inclined." "Thank you, Harry. Begad, this is the famous pudding. But blood and turnips, what's all this for?" The word was scarcely out of his mouth when he bounced up, bagpipes and all, and dashed into the middle of the party. "Hurrah, you souls! Let us make a night of it. The Ballyboulteens boys forever." "Got it, your reverence. Turn your partner heel and toe, Mr. Minister. Good. Well done again, Wish Haru. Here's for volleyball team and the skies over it. Bad luck to this sick assets ever was seen together in this world, or will again, I suppose. The worst, however, wasn't yet to come, for just as they were in the very heat of a fury of a dance, what do you think comes hopping in among them but another puddin', as nimble and merry as the first? That was enough. They all had heard of it, the ministers among the rest, and most, oh, sure enough, them had seen the other puddin', and knew that there must be a fairy in it, sure enough. Well, as I said, in it comes to the thick o' them, but the very appearance of it was enough. Off the three clergy danced, and off the whole Wettiners danced after them, each one making the best of their way home, but not a soul of them able to break out of step, if they were to be hanged for it. Throth, it wouldn't lave a laugh in you to see a parson dancing down the road on his way home, and the minister and Methodist preacher cutting the buckle as they went along in the opposite direction. To make short work of it all, they all danced home, with scarce a puff of wind in them. The bride and bridegroom danced away to bed, and now, boys, come and let us dance the Hero League in the barn at Yout. But you see, boys, before we go, and in order that I may make everything plain, I had as good tell you that Harry, in crossing the bridge at Ballybarteen, a couple miles below Squire Bradshaw's Demenswall, saw the puddin' floating down the river. The truth is, he was waiting for it, but be this as it may, he took it out, for the water had made it as clean as a new pin, and tucked it up in the trail of his big coat, contrived, as you all guess, I suppose, to change it, while Paddy Schlan and his wife were examining the sky, and for the other, he contrived to bewitch it in the same manner, by getting a fairy to go into it, for indeed, it was pretty well known that the same Harry had a hand in love with the good folk. Others will tell you that it was half a pound of quicksilver he put into it, but that doesn't stand to reason. At any rate, boys, I have told you the adventures of the mad puddin' of Ballybolteen, but I don't wish to tell you many other things about it that happened, for afraid I'd tell a lie. Our final story for today is a small one called The Lady Witch, attributed to Lady Wilde. About 100 years ago, there lived a woman in Joyce County, of whom all the neighbors were afraid, for she had plenty of money, though no one knew how she came by it, and the best of eating and drinking went on at her house, chiefly at night. Meat and fowls and Spanish wines in plenty for all comers. And when people asked how it all came, she laughed and said, I have paid for it, but would tell them no more. So the word went through the county that she had sold herself to the evil one, and could have everything she wanted by merely wishing and willing. And because of her wishes, they called her the Lady Witch. She never went out but at night, and then always with a bridle and whip in her hand, and the sound of a horse galloping was heard often far on in the night along the roads near her house. Then a strange story was whispered about, that if a young man drank of her Spanish wines at supper and afterwards fell asleep, she would throw the bridle over him and change him into a horse, and ride him all over the country, and whatever she touched with her whip became hers. Fowls or butter or wine or new-made cakes. She had but to wish and will, and they were carried by spirit hands to her house, and laid in her larder. Then, when the ride was done, and she had gathered enough through the country of all she had wanted, she took the bridle off the young man, and he came back to his own shape and fell asleep. And when he awoke, he had no knowledge of what happened, and the Lady Witch bade him again to come and drink of her Spanish wines as often as it pleased him. Now, there was a brave young fellow in the neighborhood, and he was determined to make out the truth of the story. So he often went back and forwards and made friends with the Lady Witch, and sat down to talk to her, but always on the watch. And she took a great fancy to him, and told him he must come to supper some night, and she would give him the best of everything, and he must taste her Spanish wine. So she named the night, and he went gladly, for he was filled with curiosity. And when he arrived, there was a beautiful supper laid, and plenty of wine to drink, and he ate and drank, but was cautious about the wine, and spilled it to the ground from his glass when her head was turned away. Then he pretended to be very sleepy, and she said, "My son, you are weary. Lie down there on the bench and sleep, for the night is far spent, and you are quite far from your home." So he lay down as if he were quite dead with sleep, and closed his eyes, but watched her all the time. And she came over in a little while, and watched him steadily, but he never stirred, only breathed more heavily. Then she went softly and took the bridle from the wall, and stole over to fling it over his head, but he started up, and seizing the bridle, threw it over the woman, who was immediately changed into a spanking gray mare. And he led her out, and jumped on her back, and rode away as fast as the wind till he came to the forge. "Ho, smith," he cried, "rise up and shoe my mare, for she is weary after the journey." And the smith got up and did his work as he was bid, well and strong. Then the young man mounted again, and rode back like a wind to the house of the witch, and there he took off the bridle, and she immediately regained her own form, and sank down in a deep sleep. But as the shoes had been put on at the forge without saying the proper form of words, they remained on her hands and feet, and no power on earth could remove them. So she never rose from her bed again, and died not long after of grief and shame. And not one in the whole country would follow the coffin of the Lady Witch to the grave. And the bridal was burned with fire, and all of her riches, nothing was left but a handful of ashes, and this was flung to the 4 points of the earth and the 4 winds of the heaven. So the enchantment was broken, and the power of the evil one was ended. I cannot help but feel that that's a little harsh of a punishment for her. But, nonetheless, I thank you all so much for joining me today for this catch-up reading hour. Until we next meet, my dears, ta-ta, and rest well. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like what you saw here, I ask that you leave a like, comment, subscribe, and until we next meet, my dears, I do hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And until then, ta-ta, and farewell.